Thank you, everybody who is in this room. And welcome. I can hardly contain myself because I have dreamed of something like this for decades. And I was just talking with a friend of mine this morning. We've been talking about this for 25 years. It's a momentous event, as we know. Survivors gathering together is something that many of us have wanted for many, many years. And being in this room with parents and other family members, researchers, therapists, clinicians, students, two little babies, I am more delighted than I can say. Thank you again, Five Waves. And where is Brandy Black, please? Can somebody get her for me, if you can? And thank you to the whole team of volunteers, because we made this up together, like Jane said. We knew we wanted something to happen, and we made it happen. And this is community building. This is community in action. I'm speaking today, as always, from my experience and my truth. And I invite you to hear my stories as I speak, and I invite you and I ask you to witness and hear me and to practice listening and stay with me even when something is uncomfortable or doesn't resonate or you just disagree with. This is practice for us, witnessing disclosures, people's stories, and practicing without assessing or evaluating or judging or needing to be in agreement. And again, this is community building, and this is how we shape change together. I know there are people in this room for whom it took every ounce of courage to even consider being here, much less get here. I know there are people in this room who scraped together every cent you could to be here and made asks of other people. There are people who are here by themselves. There are people who are here with that one special person who has listened to them from the first time they disclosed. There are people who are here who don't see anybody else who look like them. There are families here. There are people who have multiple roles in this community. And I want you to know that I recognize you and what it took for you to be here and what it's taken for you to be who you are. I'm going to talk about survivors a lot, and know that I'm also talking about parents and other family members. And when it comes to disclosing and telling your story, parents and other family members, you need to be able to talk. Yes, you need to honor what your children have asked of you and continue to ask of you. And you can't live in isolation. You can't do this alone, just like survivors can't. I am a survivor. I am a warrior. I am the one who was harmed in my family by this. I know disclosure from my experience and my perspective, from my research and from conversations with many, many people over the years. Brandy Black, I am deeply grateful to you for hearing my perspective, for sharing your perspective as a parent with me. I remember the first time I saw you on that Zoom call, and I looked at you through that screen and I was like, where did you come from? Why are you dealing with the fact that sibling sexual abuse happened in your family? Why did you choose to not only deal with it, but you were also acting? You were creating resources for other parents, and then you were creating resources and community with two other survivors and two other parents, moms. I'm going to start this morning where I'm going to end, imagining possibilities into action. What I want us to remember is we are doing this. And lots more people who are not here with us today. We are dreaming and creating and building and inviting the possibilities we may or may not know, and we may or may not even have any idea what they would look like. We are shaping change together, individually and together. We are lived experience. We are survivors, parents, other family members, whole families, and we are disclosing. And disclosing is hard. It is hard, it is necessary, it is courageous, it is powerful, it is life-changing, and it requires hope, fortitude, and action. And it requires one another. That's me. I didn't like things on my head. I'm smiling, but I didn't want that thing on my head. But the 4 different plaids I wanted. And that's me at an action to get a sexual abuser not on the Supreme Court. Speaking up and speaking out changes everything. It changes our cells, something in our bones. It rewrites us at the slightest wobble of those triggers. Speaking up shakes up our view of ourselves, our view of others, and our view of the world. Speaking up reorganizes our world, and speaking up reorganizes the world around us. At age 19, I told a newish acquaintance about the abuse. It took me 2 weeks from the time I started to tell her until I got a full sentence out. At age 20, I went to England. My older sister was living there, and I went for 3 weeks, and I came back 4 months later. I was running, and I was hiding. I traveled around by myself, and I would call my sister from payphones when I was dissociating and when I was such a mess. And all I wanted to do was tell her what our brother had done to me and that it was partially my fault. I couldn't get any of those words out of my mouth. At age 21, I spoke up for kids who were being mistreated, and I got fired from my job. Then I moved to Washington, D.C. for an American Sign Language, ASL English interpreting program. I found and I was welcomed by the deaf community and the lesbian feminist community. And in both of those communities, I studied and I practiced frameworks of anti-oppression and community building. And I supported and I was an ally for people who were locating their power. I started working as a self-employed ASL English interpreter, and I was scared, I was feeling powerless, and I was feeling like I might be working towards something. At age 24, with the help of my first therapist, I made plans to disclose to my family, one by one, when we gathered in Kansas and Nebraska for Hanukkah. I knew I could not be around them anymore without them knowing what my brother did and that I was such a big mess. So one by one, I told them, and one by one, they told me they believed me and they supported me. And except for my youngest sister and my mom in limited amounts, the other 5 never offered me meaningful support. Then, and for many, many years, my most common image of me and my family was them in a circle, me in the middle, and them with their backs turned towards me. Being abandoned has been a long-standing fear of mine. After having disclosed, and within 3 years, I started talking to friends about needing the stories of other survivors. If nobody else was going to gather them, I would do it. And not child's play. My book, my anthology, is what I knew I needed in order to know that I was not alone, that I was not crazy. I had scoured the bookstores and the libraries, finding almost nothing that mentioned sibling sexual abuse. And at that time, there were only a couple of books about incest of any sort, and they were always focused on men, dads, uncles, grandfathers, abusing girls. We know, and we've known for a long time, that it was not only men, it is not only men, and it is not only girls. And nobody knows that better than the people in this room. We know that sexual abuse is about stealing power. It is an exercise of what's called power over. It is about creating and instilling and ensuring powerlessness in the one who will be victimized or harmed. So I want to put sibling sexual abuse and all incest and all sexual assault and harassment into a fundamental context for us. So stay with me here. This framing is really important to me and to our movement. Kids know who get to make decisions. Even if they don't know the words agency or power, they understand how it works. My siblings and I knew that our sister had to sit at the breakfast table until her orange juice was gone. And we knew that if we drank her orange juice for her out of the sight of my dad, she got to get up from the table, which is what happened every day. Kids assess who has power, when they have power, and how that power is used by them. Kids are smart. In my mom's house, the 4 kids rotated after dinner duties. Before 2. Who set the table, who cleared the table, who washed the dishes. And after a certain point, it became usual for my brother to tell me that if I did his job, he would play catch with me after dinner. He knew how badly I wanted to play catch with him. Kids understand currency and transactions in families. So when I broke a glass and didn't want to get in trouble for it, my brother, who saw it, said, "We just won't tell anybody." We kept each other's secrets like this, and it became a habit. Drinking my sister's orange juice, trading dinner time jobs for getting to play catch, saying we didn't know how the glass got broken, these might seem innocent enough, but they were not. It became a pattern. Kids need to have access to their power and their agency, and not for attention or to coerce silence, but to grow up as confident, trusting, self-loving, self-assured, valued humans. Kids need to learn, kids need to practice, and kids need to use their agency and power in ways that uplift and support themselves and others. Nobody in my childhood taught me that. Nobody in my childhood taught me about having and using my agency and power for these reasons, but they showed me plenty about how power could be wielded over me. They taught me that I was powerless. And over the years, I've learned that I was taught a lie. Going forward, we can teach the kids and the adults in our lives that talking about agency and power is necessary and loving. We can explicitly teach kids that no is a perfectly great sentence. It's an acceptable response. We can teach kids to get, to expect, to give, and to respect assertive consent. We can teach them how to come to trusted adults when they're uncomfortable or they have questions. And we can do that by modeling, by expecting, and by practicing. I didn't have that agency or that power when I was a kid. It was squashed out of me from a very, very young age. Not intentionally, not with malice, but the results were the same. It left me in a very vulnerable and scary position, especially in my family. And at some point, somehow, I found just enough trust in myself to try to use my agency and speak out. Sexual abuse is the misuse of power, and how those with more power influence or manipulate those with less power. So here I'm going to ask you to stay with me, because I can't talk about SSTA without talking about misogyny and patriarchy and hierarchy. So stay. So stay with me, even if you think those words are too academic or don't apply to you or just simply are wrong. We live in a culture that from the beginning has been twisted by misogyny and patriarchy. Females are taught they are less than, that we are second-class citizens, that our presence and our bodies are to be used for the gain of others, society and men usually. Males are taught they are more powerful, that they get to make decisions, take from us and anyone who is valued less than them and who has less power than them. SSTA may occur in traditional gendered power over situations from a male to a female, but it also occurs with all other types of power over and privilege happening. The one with less power, as we know, may be older, may be male, may be disabled, may be financially or emotionally dependent. So I'm not talking about individuals or individual beliefs. This is the sea we swim in. And whether we like it or not, nobody is exempt from it. And these messages and teachings are everywhere. And we learn them, whether they're taught to us explicitly or not. We can't avoid them, but we can work against them. This is one of the original flyers looking for contributions for Not Child's Play. And along with me, there is one other person who contributed to this book with us today. So back to gathering the stories of survivors. It was the mid-1980s. I couldn't find what I needed, so I created it. An anthology of art and written stories by survivors, and it took me 13 years. I put out flyers looking for contributors. I found the people who wanted to be in the book. I collected the stories and art. I collected money, and I did this with an entire community. I found the courage, the will, the ability to put myself out there and to keep up my courage to do what I needed. Speaking out, whether it's on paper or in words or scribbles or drawings or color, whether it's to yourself, to loved ones, or to the wall, whether it's private or public, once or 25 times speaking out changes us. And maybe not in a way we can see or feel immediately. It might take some time. Speaking out never stops changing us. We know that SSA harms everyone in the family. And if only some of the family members face the reality of the abuse, are accountable, take steps to repair the damage, then the healing may happen for them, but it's in isolation, and that won't repair the whole family unit. I know for me, saying what was done to me, which remember took me years and then weeks to get out of my mouth once I decided I would do it, it was an immediate relief, and it was also an immediate terror. Somehow I knew that after the first time I spoke about the abuse, I needed to speak about it again and again. And I went with that teeny tiny bit of trust I had, and it grew. Never back then, some 42 years ago, was it easy, or was I without fear? Now, and for some years, I speak about the harm with ease and with compassion. And I speak about what I want and expect and this world needs with ease and confidence. At some point, I finally could believe in myself, because I could believe myself. I have worked my butt off to get to this place. And it's been worth it. Not easy, not without pain, not without fear, not without the loss of relationships, and mostly those are family relationships. But worth it, because I am worth it. Like everybody else in this room, we are worth it. Telling my family about the abuse, knowing I needed other survivor stories, creating the collection of stories in Not Child's Play, starting therapy for real, they were all milestones for me. I started therapy for real at age 34 because my best friend had just died of AIDS. When my new therapist could finally get a word in edgewise through my sobbing, she asked me if I were to draw an outline of my body on a giant sheet of paper, what would be in my outline? I just looked at her like she was from another planet. And when I finally could choke out the words, all I could say, there would be nothing in my outline. My story isn't exceptional, and nor is it the same as your story. I tell my story for me, first for me, and then I tell my story for every other survivor out there. And for the past 2 years, I know that I've been telling my story for the parents whose kid abused one of their other kids. And Brandy Black taught me that. Fiona Ward taught me that. My friend who 25 years ago told me that her son had abused her daughter and asked me what to do about it, what she should do, taught me that. I never know who my story reaches or how it lands. I just know it has to be told. I do block printing, and so a lot of the stuff you see as art is mine. I spent decades figuring out how to use my own voice. I learned how to support and speak out with others on their behalf, on traumas in their lives. That taught me that once I finally got a glimpse of being worthy, I could start speaking out on my own behalf. And I could start combining the realities of my life. So skipping ahead to age 43, I had a choice to make because I had a job teaching university at that point, and if I wanted to stay in the job, I had to get a PhD. That meant that I got to pick what I was going to study. And I chose to study and explore narratives or stories of sibling sexual abuse survivors having told one or more members of their family about the abuse. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to tell you about my study design and methodology. You can get my dissertation and read it if you want. There's fabulous stuff, and you can scroll through and find the parts that are interesting to you in a PDF. I will talk to you about it anytime. But what's useful to know is my field was sociolinguistics, which is just the study of language in use. And I did a qualitative study. And the goal of qualitative research is to look at and learn what people's experience is. It's not about numbers. That's different. The other thing to know is that I worked in the deaf community for 45 years, and I'm fluent in American Sign Language, and that's why there are deaf people in this study. So the study participants were survivors of SSA who had told one or more of their family members. There are 2 deaf survivors who spoke to each other in ASL and 2 hearing survivors who spoke to each other in spoken English, and then they all got interviewed by an interviewer. That was a separate part. As a sociolinguistic study, I looked at a whole bunch of language and linguistic things, including whether there were language differences between ASL and English. But what I'm focusing on today is what the survivors said about their disclosure experiences and about the significance of disclosing, regardless of what language they used. These are the incest survivor action figures. They were made 35 years ago by a whole bunch of different people, and they sit on my desk. They're a little cracked up. And I do workshops now where people make new ones, which is really fun. So that's how this survivor became a survivor researcher who would invite other survivors to become participants in a research study. And when I proposed what I was going to study, I got pushback. I got a lot of pushback. And the pushback came in the form of who gets to have agency, who gets to make decisions, who gets to be studied, who gets to participate in studies, and on whose terms. And that pushback was rooted in the same patriarchal and hierarchical values I mentioned before. People said to me, "Oh, it's not focused enough in your academic area. You can't do this." They said, "Don't you know it's harmful for trauma survivors to retell their stories?" And I had to walk back into the IRB with a stack of research that said, no, that's not true. They said, "How can you ensure the participants will get the support they need?" And we made sure it happened. They said, "How are you going to find participants? In fact, how are you going to even find one?" I found a lot. They said, oh, you're a survivor, then you can't reach out to other survivors. They said, you can't video record. Remember, we're talking about a signed language, and I'm going to analyze the language and the spoken language, and I need to see that too, and all the stuff people do when they talk. And they said, certainly, even if you can video record, you can't use 2 or 3 cameras, which is what I did. I exhausted all of their additional requirements to prove that my study was legitimate and would not cause harm. I also became my own worst critic. I had become so skilled at that point at compartmentalizing the SSA parts of my life that I basically put my research on a shelf and I didn't bring it into the classes that I taught or my subsequent research. And it wasn't until I left teaching 12 years later that I really started to integrate much more of who I was as a teacher, an activist, and a survivor. That I was nearly 60 years old at that point, and I don't want people to wait that long. So anything you can take from me and learn and do it earlier or in a different way that works for you, go for it. Part of the reason I do the work that I do is for other people to learn from me and see ways of living that serve you. Knowing that teenagers are disclosing these days and that they are then finding community shows the fruits of our labor. Though the participants in my study were clear that the act of simply volunteering for the study was a statement of their wish to contribute to the work and have their voices heard. It was a demonstration of their agency and resistance. It was a way for them to offer a hand of some hope to other survivors, and it was a way to speak the unspeakable and to break the cycle of silence and shame. They were very clear that disclosure was a necessary task for healing and recovery. What's most exciting to me from my research is this trajectory, and I'm going to talk about each thing. Disclosing to family members is an act of agency with the first disclosure, no matter what your choice or how you do it to tell is. It's followed by the family members' responses in this study and many of our experience, and that provides a sense of reduced agency and having less control to the survivors, and the survivors feeling disempowered, re-traumatized, and divested of agency. What I want to say about that is not set in stone. And I think the parents who are in this room who have been dealing with it can attest to that. If family members respond positively, supportively, this can be different. And that's part of why we're here. It's followed by additional acts of agency and the survivor response and reflection. And that's going back to having agency by reflecting on and integrating the disclosure and the family responses. Regaining agency and taking charge of their own lives again. So even if there is a backlash or re-traumatization as part of this experience, which there was for all of these survivors, the trajectory starting with disclosure is ultimately transformative and liberatory. So the first part of this is disclosure, secret no longer. And these are themes that came through the research that I'm going to talk about. So there was choice. There's different reasons, timing, and impacts. The participants felt conflicted. Who do I tell? How do I tell? When do I tell? Will I be believed? Will I be shunned? Will I be blamed? Will I be denied? And who will be hurt by my telling? There's the different places people are in their process, and that this is a reiterative process for survivors, even if they never talk to the same family member again. The participants talked about how disclosure was necessary. They all talked about this numerous times. They talked about how they needed to tell the story for their own sake, and that each disclosure was important, even when the results were less than satisfying or not positive. There was a build-up to each disclosure. There were mixed feelings about telling, and yet speaking was something they were glad they did. And the first disclosure was the beginning for each of them of a recovery that they had not yet reached. I think this section, the second part of the trajectory, is harder for parents and family members to hear. And so what I want to say to you is, it is never too late. For me, if my parents had ever, or if my siblings ever do want to talk with me about them understanding how their responses have been hurtful to me and to our relationships, and that they want to work on repairing that, I would welcome that as an offering and as an opening that I've never had with them. I want to remind you that there are other possibilities than these, and that this is the experience of many, many survivors. This is where the survivors feel disempowered, a reduced sense of agency, and re-traumatized by the responses. There's blaming the victim. There's lack of follow-through and silence. There's lack of understanding and a lack of acknowledgement, which often comes through in defensiveness. One of the participants said that her dad suggested that she let sleeping dogs lie, which she said just pissed me off to no end. Like, don't you think I would let them lie if I could? Do you think I am enjoying this? There's lack of accountability in their responses. There's denials and justifications and minimizations, some explicit and some couched. There's protecting of the family reputation and what people will think. And there's not respecting boundaries. The ways in which the family members reacted, what they said, how they said it, show various ways that family members try to normalize the abuse and trauma in their family. They used various strategies to try to coerce silence. They tried to find quick fixes. But all of this feeds the shame and the guilt that the survivors already have, and it serves to further isolate the survivors and compound the original injuries. And that's exactly what that's exactly the opposite of what the survivors hoped for. This is followed by agentive acts by the survivor with reflection and integration of the disclosures and the family responses. And this comes in two categories of themes. The first is understanding the consequences and the truths. And this is how the study participants experienced disclosure and transformation. The themes were who else in our family was also abused, contradictions, so holding contradictory truths simultaneously and that being tricky to navigate. There was relief in disclosing, relief in what the family knew now, relief in starting to deal with the shame and the guilt. And that was coupled with being blamed, being questioned, silence, and how things were not on the terms they wanted. We know that the abuse is always present. We try to compartmentalize, but the trauma leaks into otherwise benign situations. And we all know about coping strategies. The participants talked about staying busy, isolating themselves, doing drugs and drinking, hypervigilance, avoiding their brother and family members, dissociating. And they also talked about, as they integrated the trauma, how they recognized what strategies were maladapted or simply not needed anymore. There's continuing discomfort And there was that sea of shame and self-blame and culpability that we know is so profound and insidious and a tool to silence us. And then there was taking action, doing something, making decisions, speaking the truth, understanding connections with other types of abuse and trauma. And they talked about, a couple of them talked about connection to the Catholic priests abusing all those boys. And this connects to seeing the institution of the church and seeing the institution of the family as both being sacred, where loyalty is expected, and where silence is prized in order to maintain silence and a facade. They talked about speaking out as they talked about speaking out and disclosing as a way out of the shame and silence and isolation. This is the second part of the survivor responses, and there's 5 themes here. Recovery, we are no longer invisible. We are stepping up to change the discourse. We are declining to be seen as a victim. We are shining the spotlight on the one who harmed and their actions, and we are shining the spotlight on the context in which the violence occurred. We're stepping up to be visible and active in order to make sense of our own lives and help prevent more harm. And we are beginning or continuing our healing and recovery. I've talked about the necessity of doing this work because they talked about it. They were clear that they had to do something to understand and integrate their own experience, and no matter how easy it never was, it was absolutely necessary. They talked about how it makes us who we are. They would never have chosen to be sexually abused, of course, and they didn't accept it with passivity. And they recognized that having lived with it and through it, and that would continue for the rest of their lives, it was a part of who they were. We are not alone was huge. And though they would never wish this on anyone else, it was a relief to know they weren't alone. And they talked about how affirming, just absolutely affirming, knowing that there are other people who have the same experience was. And speaking out makes a difference. They talked about knowing that they were not alone was not enough for them. But because they knew they weren't alone, they wanted to do something for other survivors. That understanding and speaking out made a difference for themselves and other people, particularly survivors, and that they were reclaiming and using their power. The study participants experienced the act of putting language, I'm a linguist, putting language to their experience as being crucial to their healing. So the survivors in this study found a way to do what they needed to do for themselves. We find ways to do what is necessary for us in order to live with and to make sense of the abuse and its lasting consequences on our lives. These tasks of survival and meaning-making require both personal work over time and acknowledging and internalizing that having lived through these experiences has shaped us to who we are in complex ways. A moment of liberation occurs when survivors realize that the consequences of surviving trauma are complex and multi-layered. When we realize that our experiences and healing work provide us with something to offer others, a sense of solidarity, the possibility of helping another person in their healing, and a desire to do something to prevent more abuse. An important act arising out of that desire is speaking out. We tell our stories to step up visibly and actively and enter the discourse, to not allow ourselves to be rendered invisible, and to help others and prevent more abuse if possible. And we are agents of change by telling our stories. We are agents of transformation. By speaking of the abuse, we have acted to understand and integrate our experiences. And there is a force in the tellings and to the tellings, and that telling is an action of transformation. So we make sense of our experiences, we create and situate our identities, we bridge our past and future, we make sense of ourselves as individuals and as community members. And a relationship is formed between the story and the teller and the receiver. Who we tell, when we tell, why we tell, it all makes a difference. And again, the telling can be scribbling on a piece of paper. It can be talking to the wall. It can be standing in front of a whole bunch of people. For survivors, disclosing to family members is key. Tell your story was the first linoleum block that I carved because speaking out had saved me. Just like running and hiding were through lines for me, so is telling your story. We each get to speak out. We each get to choose if, when, to whom, how we might want to speak out. It is always an individual choice. If and when you do tell your story, I hope for you that you stand in your powerful self in ways that fit for you, whether it's the first time or the 300th time. And as you tell it, I hope that you can recognize and embrace and celebrate and wield the power of your voice, however your voice shows up. We get to see and experience the worthiness in ourselves and our stories. And we get to see this in other people as they tell their stories. There are social and political effects to speaking out. We create community. Look around. Look on the web. Look at the Zoom calls we do. In speaking out, we assert our agency. And that's a model and a teaching for other people. We express our solidarity and we deal with conflict. Even if you want to run away from conflict, you might be dealing with it. And we resist silence, shame, and guilt. When we tell our stories, we need witnesses to hear them. So yes, believing survivors is great, but it's no longer enough. And really, it never was. We need to take action, individually and as groups, as communities, as a movement. I ask all researchers, policy planners, and other people in that type of category to seek us out and make sure you are collaborating with us, lived experience people, from the beginning. Get our input and get our involvement. I think I speak as one of the very few public SSA survivor researchers. We know that it is crucial to center our voices of lived experience, just as we're doing here. We know that we need that in all research and policy planning. So we need researchers and policy planners to bring us in from the beginning, before you've started a project, and bring us in and take us with you all the way through. Yes, it's more work. Yes, it will make your work better and richer and more meaningful. And just like it's never too late to deal with the abuse in your family, it's never too late to bring us into your current projects. What I want to leave us with is possibility. And I want to leave us with creating possibility. Whether it's on an individual level, or a group or community level. Possibilities that you may not have even thought of yet, or maybe not said to anyone yet. possibilities that seem impossible. And here's some examples. This gathering is an example of a seemingly impossible possibility. We are here together. Survivors in their 20s being here in this room is a possibility. Teaching and modeling agency and consent for kids, with kids, that's a possibility. A parent listening to their kid, not questioning their story, taking action immediately, getting the entire family help, and holding the ones who harmed accountable, and taking responsibility as a parent and moving towards repair, that is a possibility. Those researchers pausing their work to find and collaborate with survivors and family members to make sure that the research is for, by, and with survivors and family members, that's a possibility. Any of us speaking up and bringing SSA into everyday conversation is a possibility. The ability to choose for oneself and to exercise individual power is the essential core of speaking up and building communities of prevention and of healing. We are taking back, finding, and teaching ourselves agency and power. We are doing that. And the act of being able to choose is the most powerful act for a child, for a survivor, for a warrior, and for parents and family members. I've talked today about the importance of stories and agency, that shame and self-loathing are fundamental tools of silencing us, that disclosing, speaking up, and speaking out changes everything, that we resist with ubiquity, and that we are breaking the cycle of violence and transforming lives. Think of yourself or someone you know, someone you love, stepping up visibly and actively to make sense of their lives, to be an agent of change, to be a force of transformation because they are speaking up about the abuse. And in that telling, they transform themselves and others, but most importantly, themselves. In my bio for this conference, I said what I dreamed of for us and the world, and I'm going to close with a few of those words and sentiments. We are shaping change. For ourselves, for one another, for people, and especially for the children we don't even know and will never ever meet. May we do that with intention, with truth, with accountability, and always be prepared for repair. May we honor and embrace speaking truth as courageous, as power, and as liberation. May other children never know the harm that we know so well. And may they have every opportunity and all encouragement to be zestful, agentive, peaceful beings. I am so grateful to get to be here, to get to speak, and to have today with all of you as we continue to build community and connection. Thank you.